Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Offroad Update. As the 2025 Grand National Cross Country Series concluded the first half of the year and began the second half of the championship season all in the same event, there was a two-horse race established at the front of the field. Ben Kelly and Grant Davis, the respective points leaders in the XC1 and the XC2 classes, were the two riders with the most consistent seasons thus far. And as the dust settled at round 7, the Hoosier GNCC in Crawfordsville, Indiana, the leading duo would find themselves at the front once again. When the green flag waved to start the 3-hour pro race at Ironman Raceway, the overall points leader Ben Kelly was the first rider into turn 1. He ran wide though, and for the second race in a row, Stu Baylor, after sneaking around the inside, grabbed the whole shot aboard his Kawasaki. Jordan Ashburn was right behind him going into turn 3, while Caleb Russell shoved his way to the inside of Ashburn, but hit a false neutral rounding the corner and fell down to the ground. Liam Draper, Josh Strang, Mike Wachowski, and the rest of the XC1 field picked up a spot at the expense of KR as the field headed into the woods. 1 minute later, the XC2 class was underway and headed toward the right-hand first corner, exiting the turn and grabbing a convincing hole shot was Gus Reardon aboard his KTM. Teammate and points leader Grant Davis was next, followed by Brody Johnson, Josh Toth, and Toby Cleveland, with the rest of the XC2 talent pool in tow as the riders left the Indiana crop fields. Just 2 miles after the start, and the riders popped back out into the open fields next to the start line. Baylor led the way, leaving a trail of dust for the riders to follow. Evan Smith on his Ampro Yamaha was in second, with Ashburn running third. Josh Strang on his Beta was fourth, just ahead of Ben Kelly. Sixth was Wachowski, with Ricky Russell slotting into seventh. Craig DeLong was eighth, ahead of Draper, while Thad Duvall in his return to racing rounded out the top 10 ahead of Ryder Lafferty, Lyndon Snodgrass in his return to racing, Grant Baylor, Caleb Russell after his third turn crash, New England rider Brandon Gregoire, and Jesse Ansley on XC1 debut after borrowing Stu Baylor's practice bike after the engine in his 250 let go in a Friday practice session leading into the weekend. Not far behind came XC2. Brody Johnson popped into view with the lead aboard his Brian Easler Toyota-backed Honda, with Davis in tow ahead of Toth, Reardon trying to set up a pass on the Kawasaki rider for fourth. Nick DeFeo rounded out the top 5 with Cleveland in 6th, Cody Barnes in 7th after a bad start. Jack Walker was 8th, Hunter Bush in 9th, with Mike DeLosa rounding out the top 10 ahead of Dakota DeVore. Nearing the end of the opening lap, and it was Baylor ahead of Evan Smith as Ashburn and Kelly were next, displacing Strang back to 5th. Wachowski was 6th ahead of Ricky Russell, with DeLong holding down 8th. Draper and Lafferty rounded out the top 10, with Caleb Russell just behind. Snodgrass, Grant Baylor, Gregoire, and Duvall were next as Davis came by with a new lead in XC2, but was within the 1 minute time adjustment from the start, locking in with the overall lead at the end of lap 1. Reardon came through next, dropping Johnson to 3rd. Barnes was on the charge after a poor start, checking in for 4th on his Phoenix Honda, as Kawasaki teammates Toth and DeFeo checked in for 5th and 6th. Cleveland was 7th ahead of Walker, Bush, and DeLosa. A couple miles before the end of the second lap, and it was still Baylor in the point position looking for his second win in a row. Smith, after missing the early rounds due to injury and illness, was putting in an early career-best performance. Moving into 3rd was 2021 champion Kelly, displacing the 2022 champion Ashburn back to 4th. Strang and Wachowski were still fighting over 5th, as well as who didn't have to choke on dust amongst the two of them. Ricky Russell on his Triumph ran 7th, while Draper held 8th after early mistakes on the opening lap. DeLong was 9th, while 10th physically on track was Davis. Lafferty was 11th ahead of Reardon, while Caleb Russell had Cody Barnes locked on his rear wheel, now running 3rd in XC2. Lyndon Snodgrass rounded out the top 15 on track. As the riders checked in on adjusted time, the front 3 overall were Davis, Reardon, and Barnes, as Baylor, Smith, and Kelly were 4th, 5th, and 6th. 2 miles in on lap 3, and the race up front turned into a three-way fight as Baylor, Smith, and Kelly were all in the same camera shot, splashing their way through the Ironman Creek. 4 through 7 in the running order was the same as Ashburn led the group ahead of Wachowski, Russell, and Draper. Davis, meanwhile, had dispatched DeLong to run 8th in the physical order. Reardon rounded out the top 10 ahead of Barnes as the top 11 physically were starting to stretch out from the rest of the field. Nearing the end of the ensuing lap, and Baylor had Kelly hounding the rear wheel of his Red Bear Kawasaki, as the duo had stretched their advantage slightly back to the new third-place rider Ashburn, who had company of his own in the form of Wachowski. Running 5th on track was XC2 leader Davis, who had 3rd and 4th in his sights. Smith dropped to 6th in the order ahead of teammate Draper, while Reardon moved up to 8th on track ahead of Barnes, with DeLong rounding out the top 10 ahead of Ricky Russell. Halfway through lap 4, in the only muddy area of the race course, it was Ben Kelly popping into view with the lead, with a few second gap over Baylor. Jordan Ashburn still ran third on his number 3 gas, with Davis now into 4th and with plenty of time adjustment on his side as he still held the overall lead from row 2. Wachowski, Draper, and Reardon were next ahead of Barnes, the latter two from XC2 still running 2nd and 3rd on adjusted time behind Davis. Ricky Russell moved ahead of DeLong to run 9th, with the Husqvarna champ from 2023 rounding out the top 10 ahead of Strang, as Smith would not make it much farther after the end of the 3rd lap. Keeping their own names in the overall conversation, however, were 250A class leaders JoJo Cunningham and Gavin Simon, the duo putting their names near the top 10 overall picture on adjusted time the entire afternoon. Starting lap 5, and it became the battle up front for the rest of the day. Kelly, still in control of the leading position, had only seconds to spare before Davis came through in the 2nd physical spot on course. The reigning XC2 champ with 2 overall wins at the end of 2024 had yet to earn an overall victory through the first 6 rounds. Draper had put on a charge and moved all the way to the 3rd physical spot on track, with Reardon in 4th and 2nd overall, just ahead of Wachowski in 5th. Barnes in 6th, while Ashburn dropped to 7th, running 4th in XC1. Where was Baylor? Electrical issues forced the Powerline Park winner into the pits at the beginning of the lap. After an extended stop, he would rejoin the fray in 8th physically. Ricky Russell was 9th, while DeLong and Strang were battling for 10th. Caleb Russell was 12th ahead of Snodgrass and Duvall, with Josh Toth rounding out the top 15, 4th in XC2. With the white flag lap underway, Davis, who had made the pass in the previous lap, now led the race physically after starting 1 minute behind the XC1 field. Kelly, the points leader and Davis's closest championship rival, ran 2nd on track while leading XC1. 3rd and 4th physically on track were Gus Reardon and Cody Barnes. The duo locked in a battle for 2nd and 3rd in XC2 would lead all the way down to the checkered flag. Wachowski ran 5th as Ashburn and Strang were fighting over 6th. DeLong was next, while Caleb Russell found a groove and moved his way into 9th, while Ricky Russell rounded out the top 10 on track. Baylor, meanwhile, would not make it to the checkered flag. At the checkered flag, Grant Davis was the first one across the line, claiming the overall win, while also physically passing every XC1 rider in the field and winning the XC2 class for the day. Just a few seconds behind was Ben Kelly, enough time behind him to claim 2nd overall for the afternoon. 3rd and physically and overall went to the end, with Barnes trying to make a pass with a couple corners to go, but to no avail, as Reardon held on for 3rd overall in the afternoon and 2nd in XC2, with Barnes rounding out the XC2 podium. Liam Draper would finish next, with Mike Wachowski to round out the XC1 podium. Josh Strang checked in 4th in XC1 and 7th overall for the day, with Ashburn rounding out the top 5, 8th overall. Craig DeLong was 9th, while Caleb Russell rounded out the top 10. Josh Toth and Brody Johnson would round out the top 5 in XC2.
Well, after what Nick did at round 1 and Johnny's comments here, you definitely wanted that one.
Yeah, for sure. I pushed really hard this year. I've been working my ass off, and finally it panned out, and finally got it done. Not even just overall, just the timing. I did it physically on track on a fast day that the big bikes would be better, and I really wish I was on a big bike today, to be honest with you. I want to start with them guys and get up there and race with them to see how it is and different instead of being on the time change. But other than that, I'm pumped, and I did this for Johnny G. I know that. He's one of my best friends, and I can't thank him enough for coaching me for the past 2 or 3 years of my life. He's been there forever, but past 2 or 3 years, me and him got really close, and even before every race, the guy's texting me. Middle of the week, he's texting me all the time, and we talk back and forth, and I can't thank him enough.
As the series moves into the second half of the season, only 1 point separates Ben Kelly and Grant Davis in the championship point standings. Gus Reardon sits in 3rd, with Cody Barnes in 4th in the order. Liam Draper rounds out the top 5, while Stu Baylor, after a second DNF on the year, drops to 6th. 7th spot is Caleb Russell, with Craig DeLong in 8th, as Mike Wachowski and Josh Toth round out the top 10. Thank you everyone for watching. Round 8 of the 2025 GNCC season heads to Mount Morris, Pennsylvania at High Point Raceway, May 31st and June 1st for the Mason-Dixon GNCC. I'll see you guys there.